She had learned, from a very young age, how to take up as little space as possible, not because she lacked presence, but because the world rewarded women who did not demand to be seen, especially women like her, well-educated, well-mannered, useful in alliances, but never intended to be central to their own stories. Josephine stood before the tall mirror in the west wing of the ducal residence, watching her reflection settle into stillness. The gown was immaculate. Pale silk, restrained embroidery, pearls chosen for discretion rather than brilliance. Everything about her appearance conveyed dignity, suitability, and quiet compliance. Everything, except her eyes. They held a tired awareness that had not been there 6 weeks earlier. She waited until her maid finished fastening the last button and left the room before allowing her shoulders to lower by the slightest degree. Silence filled the chamber, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, echoing sort that followed words spoken once and never taken back. Words that had not been said aloud again, but which governed every corridor of the house. Produce what is required, then remove yourself. They had been delivered without cruelty in his tone, which somehow made them worse. Spoken like instructions, like terms agreed upon between rational adults. Josephine had nodded that night, not because she agreed, but because she had not yet learned how to refuse. The marriage had happened quickly, too quickly for sentiment, too efficiently for romance. The Duke had required a wife within a narrow window of time. Titles, inheritances, reputations, all things governed by deadlines that did not care for personal readiness. She had been chosen deliberately. Josephine understood that now. Chosen not because she was beautiful, though she was, not because she was brilliant, though she had always been, but because she was safe, a woman with no scandal attached to her name, a family respectable but not powerful enough to challenge him, a temperament assumed to be manageable. She had been selected like a solution. The morning light crept across the floor as she turned away from the mirror. Today would be her first public appearance since the wedding, an evening gathering that would confirm what society already suspected, that the Duke of Northmere had acquired a duchess, and nothing more. Their carriages arrived side by side at the estate hosting the event. He assisted her down with impeccable politeness, his gloved hand steady, distant. To anyone watching, they appeared exactly as they should. Josephine matched his pace as they entered the grand hall, aware of every glance, every half-whispered observation. Too sudden, the marriage; too quiet, the bride; too composed, the Duke. She smiled when expected, inclined her head at the correct angles, allowed herself to be guided away by hostesses eager to assess the newest duchess before deciding whether she mattered. It took less than 10 minutes for her to realize something unexpected. She mattered. Not because of him, but in spite of him. The women who gathered around her were curious, sharp-eyed, politically astute. They asked careful questions, not about romance, but about influence, about how she intended to occupy her position. Josephine answered honestly, within the boundaries allowed to her. She spoke of interests rather than affections, of responsibilities rather than emotions, of intention rather than obedience. And slowly, something shifted. She felt it in the way conversations lingered, in the way invitations extended without reference to her husband, in the way she was addressed, not as an extension of him, but as herself. Across the room, the Duke watched. He had expected competence. What he had not expected was presence. Josephine was not radiant in the theatrical sense. She did not demand attention. She earned it by listening, by responding thoughtfully, by standing with a quiet assurance that unsettled him more than any overt challenge could have. When they danced, it was because custom demanded it. His hand rested at her waist, hers on his arm. Their steps aligned flawlessly, as though practiced over years rather than rehearsed out of necessity. She did not look at him, not once. And for the first time since the wedding, Nicholas felt the faint, unwelcome stir of uncertainty. Later, in the carriage, he spoke only to issue guidance, which connections to encourage, which questions to avoid, which version of their union to present. Josephine listened without interruption. When he finished, she nodded. "I understand perfectly, Your Grace." The words were polite. The tone was final. They returned to the estate long after midnight. He escorted her to her wing, a formality maintained for the benefit of servants and walls that carried sound. "You did well this evening," he said, as though assessing performance. "So did you," she replied. He paused, unsettled by something he could not name. Josephine did not linger. She closed the door between them with deliberate calm and leaned against it only after his footsteps faded. Her breath shook once, then stilled. That night, she did not cry. She sat at her writing desk instead and began composing letters, accepting invitations, proposing gatherings, offering patronage. If she was expected to disappear quietly, she would do the opposite, without confrontation, without rebellion, without ever once asking for permission. She would become visible in ways he had not anticipated, and she would never again attempt to earn affection that had been withheld as leverage. Somewhere in the vastness of the house, Nicholas Graymont slept without knowing that his carefully arranged solution had already begun to shift beyond his control. Josephine did not intend to punish him, but she would not vanish. Not now. Not ever. Morning at Northmere did not arrive with warmth. It arrived with order. Soft footsteps in corridors, curtains drawn at the same hour, tea laid out at the same place. A house so perfectly managed, it felt as if it could run without a single living heart inside it. Josephine preferred to take breakfast early, alone, before the day could begin demanding things of her. But when she entered the smaller morning room, she stopped. The Duke was already there, not in the grand dining hall, where distance could be disguised as formality. Here, in a room meant for closeness, he rose the moment he saw her, precise as a soldier. "Good morning." She returned the greeting with the same careful tone she used for strangers who carried power. "Your Grace." A pause. Not awkward, deliberate. She moved to the sideboard, poured tea, arranged food she did not want onto a plate, because appearance mattered even when appetite did not. "I wanted to speak with you," he said. Josephine sat at the far end of the table, placing space between them like a third person. He looked as though he had rehearsed this, as though he had spent the night arranging the correct words, the way he arranged everything else. "I owe you an apology," he began, then stopped, the rest caught behind his teeth. Josephine did not rescue him. The Duke of Northmere had never rescued her. Finally, he continued, "For last night, for my manner." Her fingers tightened around the teacup. "My manner," she echoed lightly, as if it were a topic of weather. He flinched, and she noted it with faint surprise. He was not a man accustomed to flinching. "You were present," he said carefully. "You did what was required of you. Society seems pleased." "As you intended," Josephine replied. His gaze sharpened. "You sound as though you're accusing me." "I'm not accusing," she said, calm as glass. "I'm observing." He sat again, slow, controlled. "You're angry." There it was at last. Weeks late. As if anger were something he could notice only once it inconvenienced him. Josephine let the silence stretch long enough to make the room feel smaller. "I'm not angry," she said. "Anger suggests expectation." His jaw tightened. "Then what are you?" "Tired," she answered simply, and no longer confused. That landed. She watched it land, because men like him were used to women being confused, used to them making softness where there was none, used to them inventing meaning so that men would not have to. He leaned forward slightly, as though proximity could solve what he had created. "I never intended to—" Josephine lifted one finger. Not rude, not dramatic, just final. "The night of our wedding," she said quietly, "you did not speak to me as a husband. You left instructions." His eyes flickered, just once. She continued, voice even. "You did not say them with anger. You did not even say them to my face." He went still. Josephine remembered the detail with a clarity that still made her stomach tighten. The empty bed beside her, the hush of the room, the candle nearly burned down, and the letter on the table. Simple handwriting, precise phrasing, cold restraint, a condition written as if it were a clause in a contract, and at the bottom, the line that finished it like a blade. "Don't mistake this for affection." She had not forgotten a single word. She set her cup down with care. "So forgive me," she added, "if I find it difficult to interpret sudden concern as sincerity." The Duke stared at her as though he had just realized he lived with a person rather than a title. "You're right," he said at last, voice rougher than she expected. "I handled it badly." "Badly," she repeated, tasting the understatement. He swallowed. "I thought I was being honest." "Honesty without humanity is not virtue," Josephine replied. The air between them sharpened. He spoke again, quieter. "What do you want from me?" The question should have satisfied something in her. It didn't, because she wanted too much. She wanted warmth, she wanted safety, she wanted to believe that marriage could become more than duty, but she could not afford to want things from a man who had already proven he could remove tenderness as easily as he removed his gloves. So she chose the only answer that protected her pride. "I want exactly what you offered," she said, "a secure position, a comfortable life, freedom to pursue my own interests." He watched her, searching for a crack, a plea, a hope he could ignore. Josephine gave him nothing. "That is reasonable," he said finally. "Good," she answered. "Then we understand one another." She rose. He rose too, as if he could stop her with politeness. But Josephine was already leaving the room, already turning her mind toward letters, committees and invitations, a life that did not require his presence. 2 days later, the air was bright enough to feel insulting. Richmond Park stretched wide and green, sunlight filtering through branches. Horses moved in smooth lines over the path. Laughter floated between riders. Josephine rode with the women who had invited her, women who spoke to her as though she mattered, as though her choices held weight. She kept her posture steady, her hands light on the reins, her attention forward. She refused to look for her husband until she felt him anyway, not with sight, with instinct. He rode nearby, sometimes distant, sometimes close, as though unsure where he was allowed to exist in relation to her. Josephine pretended not to notice. She spoke instead about plans, about education, about creating something that did not depend on the whims of a man's affection. The women listened, they asked questions, they offered names of donors and patronesses, and for the first time since the wedding, Josephine felt her chest loosen, just slightly, around something that almost resembled purpose. Then it happened. A rabbit cut across the path. Athena, her mare, shied hard, hooves striking the ground in sudden panic. Josephine's body reacted before her fear could. She loosened pressure, grounded her seat, guided rather than fought. Athena danced sideways, but did not bolt. Josephine breathed through it, calm, firm, competent, and then a shadow crashed into her space. A black stallion, a gloved hand gripping Athena's bridle, the Duke, his knuckles white, his face pale, his eyes, not cold now, fierce. "Let go," Josephine snapped. He blinked, startled by her voice. "She could have thrown you," he said, tight. "She didn't," Josephine replied, "because I handled it." His hand remained for one more beat, as if he couldn't release the idea of protecting her. Then he let go. Josephine turned Athena away. Her heart pounded, not from fear of the horse, from fury, because he could rush toward her when danger was visible, but he could not cross a breakfast table when pain was quiet. When they returned and she dismounted, he was there again before the grooms. "Allow me," he said, not a request. He lifted her down as if she weighed nothing, hands strong at her waist. For one breath, she was close enough to smell him, clean, restrained, expensive, close enough to remember the distance he had forced between them. Josephine stepped back immediately. "Thank you," she said, colder than the wind. His voice lowered. "We should speak." "There is nothing to speak about," Josephine replied. A horse moved. I stayed seated. "The world continues." "You're angry," he said again, as though repeating the word might solve it. Josephine looked at him fully now, her expression polite, her eyes merciless. "I'm managing what was written for me," she said. "I am learning how to exist without expecting anything." His face darkened at something he could not undo. That evening, the knock came at her door. Unusual, uninvited. Josephine sat at her writing desk, ink drying on letters meant for people who would support her project. When she allowed him in, he stood just inside the threshold, leaving the door slightly open, as if even privacy required distance. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. Josephine did not offer him a chair. She only folded her hands and waited. He inhaled, then spoke as if forcing the words through something stiff inside him. "I chose you because I believed you would be easy to manage." There, at last, the truth, not dressed in courtesy. Josephine's mouth went still. He continued, voice low. "I believed you would accept what I offered and ask for nothing else. I believed that would keep everything contained." "And did it?" Josephine asked. His eyes lifted. For the first time, he looked like a man uncertain of his own answer. "No," he said quietly. "It didn't." Josephine leaned back in her chair. "Then you should have chosen someone else," she replied. The Duke's hands flexed as if he had the urge to reach for something. Control, perhaps, or her. He did neither. Instead, he said, barely above a whisper, "I was wrong." Josephine held his gaze, not softened, not forgiving, just present, because if he wanted to rebuild anything at all, he would have to begin with the one thing he had never truly given her. Acknowledge her as real, and for the first time, in the stillness of her room, he seemed to understand that she had already stopped disappearing. "Give me an heir and disappear." Northmere adjusted to Josephine's presence without asking permission. It happened quietly. Doors opened sooner when her name was mentioned. Invitations arrived addressed to the Duchess alone. Notes circulated among women of influence with her handwriting recognized and respected. Josephine moved through it all with composed intention. She no longer waited to be included. She accepted, she initiated, she organized, her mornings filled with correspondence, afternoons with meetings, evenings with social obligations she chose rather than endured. The house that had once felt cavernous and indifferent now responded to her rhythm. The Duke noticed. He noticed because absence had been his strategy, and it was failing. She did not seek him out, did not ask his opinion, did not announce her plans. She informed him only when required by protocol, her tone calm, factual, unprovocative, and that, more than anger, unsettled him. At breakfast, they sat across from one another like polite adversaries. She spoke of schedules. He spoke of estate matters. Nothing personal crossed the table. Until one morning he said, "You were invited to Lady Ashworth's gathering tomorrow." "I accepted yesterday," Josephine replied. He paused. "Without consulting me." "I did not realize I was required to," she said mildly. The silence stretched. "You are the Duchess of Northmere," he said at last. Your appearances reflect on the title. And yet, Josephine replied, eyes lifting to meet his, I was given full instruction to manage myself. He had no answer prepared for that. The gathering itself was small but deliberate, a circle of women who did not meet for ornament, they met for influence. Josephine arrived composed, observant, ready. Conversation moved from fashion to funding, from charity as appearance to charity as structure. She listened more than she spoke at first, measuring interest, understanding currents. When she finally proposed the idea, education for young women beyond domestic skill, the room stilled. It was controversial. It was necessary. It was exactly the kind of thing that would shift attention toward her permanently. Questions followed, sharp ones. Josephine answered without apology. She spoke of practicality, not rebellion, of stability, not defiance, of women who could manage households, accounts, and correspondence without dependence. She did not speak of freedom, she spoke of competence. By the end of the afternoon, she had allies. When the Duke heard of it, he said nothing, but he began to watch more closely. He watched how her name circulated without his prompting, how her absence from rooms was noted, how her presence altered conversations. And then, inevitably, someone else noticed too. Lady Margot Sinclair did not approach Josephine openly at first. She observed from across ballrooms, from beside other women, from corners where commentary could be disguised as curiosity. When she finally spoke to Josephine, it was with a smile sharpened by experience. "My dear Duchess," she said, linking her arm as though they were already allies. "How fortunate you are." Josephine tilted her head slightly. "In what regard?" "In marrying a man so disciplined," Margot continued, "so controlled. Some women mistake restraint for coldness, but I find it reassuring." Josephine's gaze sharpened. "I find clarity more reassuring than restraint," she replied. Margot laughed softly. "Oh, of course, but men like your husband, men shaped by disappointment, they are not given to warmth." "Is that so?" Josephine asked. Margot leaned closer. "He loved once, very deeply. It altered him." Josephine did not blink. "I see," she said. Margot smiled, satisfied. "I simply wanted to ensure you entered this marriage with realistic expectations." Josephine withdrew her arm gently. "My expectations," she said calmly, "are mine to manage." Margot's eyes flashed with something close to irritation. "Of course," she said. "I only meant—" "I'm sure you did," Josephine replied. "But unsolicited concern tends to reveal more about the speaker than the subject." She walked away without haste, without drama. But the seed had been planted. That night, Josephine lay awake longer than usual. Not because of the Duke, but because of the idea that she had not been chosen in spite of his past, but because of it, because someone unguarded would have been inconvenient, because someone hopeful would have required effort, because someone like her, controlled and contained, seemed manageable. The next morning she rode again. This time, the Duke joined the outing unannounced. He positioned himself near her without explanation. When she dismounted, he was there. When she spoke with others, he watched. Not possessive, not protective, observant, as if recalculating something he had misjudged. At one point, he said quietly, "You handle yourself well." Josephine met his gaze. "I always have." That evening, he came to her door again. This time, he did not hover at the threshold. He stepped inside. "I did not expect you to become this," he said. Josephine set down her pen. "And what is this?" she asked. "A presence," he answered. "An influence." She considered him carefully. "You expected obedience," she said. "You received autonomy." He exhaled slowly. "You are making this difficult." Josephine rose. "No," she said. I am making this honest. He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time, something in his expression resembled uncertainty rather than control. Josephine, he said, I need you to understand. She raised her hand. No, she replied. You need to understand. She stepped closer, not challenging, not pleading. I will not disappear, she said quietly, not socially, not emotionally, not from my own life. If you doubt me, she continued, voice steady, if you choose to believe others over me, you lose me. The words were not a threat. They were a boundary. He stared at her, struck silent. Josephine turned back to her desk. Good night, Your Grace. And for the first time since their wedding, Nicholas Graymont realized something he had never accounted for. He had married a woman who would not wait to be chosen. And the cost of doubting her would be absolute. Give me an heir and disappear. The rumors did not begin loudly. They never did. They moved the way smoke does, thin at first, almost polite, curling through drawing rooms and corridors until no one could quite remember where the scent had started. Josephine noticed the change before anyone warned her. Invitations arrived later. Smiles lingered less. Certain conversations stopped when she entered a room, then resumed with exaggerated warmth. It was not hostility, it was hesitation. And hesitation, she had learned, was far more dangerous. The first comment reached her through kindness. My dear, Lady Worthington said one afternoon, lowering her voice as they sat together, you know I would never repeat gossip. But I felt you should be aware. Josephine did not interrupt. There are suggestions, Lady Worthington continued carefully, that your recent prominence is not entirely your own. Josephine's fingers stilled on her teacup. In what sense? She asked calmly. That certain gentlemen have taken a special interest in supporting your project. Josephine understood immediately. Not concern, not morality, control. She smiled faintly. My meetings are never private. I know, Lady Worthington said quickly. Everyone sensible knows. But sense has never been society's strongest quality. Josephine thanked her sincerely. Then she went home and closed herself into her study. She did not cry. She organized. She reviewed guest lists, correspondence, times, chaperones. She made copies. She documented patterns. She traced where whispers travelled fastest, and every path led back to the same woman. Lady Margot Sinclair had not retreated. She had merely changed tactics. The Duke heard the rumours the following morning. He did not hear them gently. They were placed before him in ink. A scandal sheet, folded carefully on the breakfast table. Its headline engineered for maximum damage. Josephine stood across the room when he read it. She watched his face change, watched the familiar walls snap back into place with terrifying speed. Is there any truth to this? He asked. The question landed like a blow. Josephine felt something inside her crack, not loudly but completely. No, she said. None. He scanned the page again, jaw tightening. It claims witnesses. Paid ones, Josephine replied. Or foolish ones. He looked up. His eyes were not cruel, they were afraid, and fear, she realized, was the most dangerous thing he carried. You met with Lord Hartwick, he said. With others present, she answered, always. He exhaled sharply. You see how this looks? Josephine crossed the room. You defended me once, she said quietly. Yesterday, without hesitation. His voice dropped. And now, she continued, you are standing in the exact place I warned you about. Silence fell between them, thick and unforgiving. He said nothing. That was worse. Josephine straightened. I will give you proof, she said evenly. Every account, every name, every confirmation you require. He nodded once, stiff. I will investigate. She stepped back, as if distance were suddenly necessary for survival. Do so, she replied, but understand this. His eyes lifted. "You do not get to doubt me quietly and call it caution," she said. "If you doubt me at all, you lose me." The words were not raised. They did not need to be. She turned and left the room before he could answer. The investigation lasted 2 days. 2 days of waiting. 2 days of knowing that trust, once fractured, did not heal simply because truth eventually arrived. Josephine stayed in her wing. She received Lady Worthington, Lady Ashworth, others who offered support quietly, carefully. Not one of them doubted her. That knowledge steadied her. On the 3rd morning, the Duke came to her door. He did not knock twice. He looked as though he had not slept. "I was wrong," he said the moment she allowed him inside. "Entirely." Josephine did not respond. "Every claim was false," he continued. "Witnesses bribed, dates fabricated. The paper will be sued. Publicly." She listened without satisfaction. "I believed you," he said. Josephine lifted her gaze. "No," she corrected softly. "You verified me." The distinction mattered. He flinched. "I defended you," he said. "After," she replied. He swallowed. "I will ruin her," he said. "Margot. Socially. Permanently." Josephine shook her head once. "This is not about punishment," she said. "It is about pattern." She stepped closer, close enough that he could not retreat behind formality. "You were tested," she said, "and you hesitated." His voice broke. "I was afraid." "I know," she answered. "That is why this hurts." She turned away. "I asked for one thing," she said, "belief before explanation." He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Josephine dismissed him without ceremony, not in anger, in protection, because forgiveness, she understood now, did not arrive all at once. And trust, once cracked, had to be rebuilt deliberately, brick by brick, and this time she would not do the work alone, give me an heir and disappear. The house changed after the scandal, not visibly. Northmere remained immaculate. Servants moved with the same precision. Meals were served at the same hours. Carriages arrived and departed on schedule. But something essential had shifted. Silence, once neutral, had become weighted. Josephine felt it most in the mornings. The Duke no longer avoided her. He waited. At breakfast, he arrived early and remained seated until she entered. He rose every time, not from habit, but intention. He spoke only when spoken to, asked questions and accepted answers without challenge. It was not affection. It was restraint. And restraint, when chosen consciously, was effort. Weeks passed. He followed through on every promise made after the scandal. The paper was ruined publicly. Retractions were printed. Apologies issued. Lady Margot's name began to disappear from invitations with a speed that suggested collective relief. Still, Josephine did not soften. She remained civil, correct, unavailable. He did not touch her, not even accidentally. When their paths crossed in corridors, he stepped aside. When conversations drifted into personal territory, he withdrew. It was not punishment, it was respect. And that, paradoxically, was what unsettled her most, because effort sustained over time carried more weight than grand gestures ever could. One evening, 6 weeks after the scandal, Josephine hosted a small gathering at Northmere. It was deliberate, a charitable musical, nothing ostentatious. Invitations extended carefully, the guest list balanced, influential enough to matter, restrained enough to avoid spectacle. The Duke attended without being asked. He stood at her side when she greeted guests, not possessive, not distant, present. Josephine noticed how people watched him. They noticed too, and when Lady Catherine Hafford entered the room, Josephine felt it before she saw her. The air tightened, conversation faltered. Catherine was beauty sharpened by confidence, familiar, dangerous, entirely uninvited. She approached with a smile that assumed permission. "Your Grace," she said to Josephine. "How unexpected." Josephine met her gaze calmly. "Indeed." Catherine's eyes shifted to the Duke. "Nicholas," she said softly. The name was a test. He did not answer it. Instead, he stepped forward. "You need to leave," he said. Catherine laughed lightly. "I came as a guest. You came to provoke," he interrupted, "and you will not do so here." The room had gone silent. Josephine did not move. She watched, because this was not about dignity. This was about choice. "You are not welcome in my home," he continued. "You never will be." Catherine's smile collapsed. "You're making a scene." "No," he said. "I'm ending one." He gestured once, firm, final. Lord Ashworth intervened immediately, escorting Catherine out before she could recover. Whispers followed her departure, not scandalized, approving. The Duke turned to Josephine. "I should have done that years ago," he said quietly. She held his gaze. "You did it now," she replied. That night, when the last guest had gone, Josephine stood alone in the drawing room, letting the quiet return. He approached slowly. "I didn't ask your permission," he said. "But I chose you." Her breath caught despite herself. "I know," she said. "I will always choose you," he added. "Before explanation, before comfort, before fear." Josephine closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "Come to my chambers tonight," she said. His stillness was immediate. "Are you certain?" "Yes," she answered. "But understand this." He waited. "This is not obligation," she said. "Not duty, not repair." "I know." "This is choice," she finished. He nodded once. When he came to her an hour later, there were no letters, no instructions, no conditions, only consent, only patience, only presence. And for the first time since the night they married, Josephine did not feel managed. She felt seen, not as a duchess, not as a solution, but as a woman who had refused to disappear and been believed. "Give me an heir and disappear." Trust did not return with warmth. It returned with consistency. The morning after Josephine invited him to her chambers, there were no declarations, no sudden tenderness performed for reassurance, no expectation that one night erased months of fracture. Instead, there was steadiness. The Duke did not linger where he was not invited. He did not presume access because it had been granted once. He treated closeness as something earned repeatedly, not claimed. That mattered more to Josephine than he could have known. Days unfolded into weeks, and the rhythm between them settled into something careful but real. They shared meals without tension. They spoke of practical matters, the estate, correspondence, her education project, and sometimes, cautiously, of themselves. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he did not defend himself. He explained. That distinction softened something she had armored tightly. Still, she did not rush forgiveness. She allowed it to arrive in parts. The first came the day she realized she no longer braced herself when he entered a room. The second came when she stopped rereading his expressions for signs of withdrawal. The third arrived quietly, one afternoon when she was reviewing accounts and felt suddenly unwell. At first, she dismissed it. Fatigue was familiar. She had been pushing herself relentlessly since the scandal, determined not to appear fragile. But the unease lingered. A light-headedness, a faint nausea she could not reason away. Her maid noticed before she did. "You should send for the physician, Your Grace," the girl said gently. Josephine hesitated. She knew what such a visit might imply, and she was not ready. Not because she feared motherhood, but because she feared what it would mean to him. When the physician confirmed it, quietly and professionally, the room seemed to tilt. Josephine listened to instructions she barely registered. Weeks along, healthy, caution advised. When she was alone again, she sat very still. The irony was not lost on her. The one thing demanded of her at the beginning, the condition placed upon her body before her heart had even been acknowledged, had arrived now unbidden in the middle of uncertainty. She did not tell him immediately, not because she wished to withhold the truth, but because she needed to know what the truth meant to her first. That evening, he found her in the sitting room, pale and unusually quiet. "Are you unwell?" he asked. She met his gaze. "I'm pregnant." The words were simple. His reaction was not. Shock passed over his face, followed by something rawer, not triumph, not relief, but fear. Josephine saw it, and something in her tightened. "So," she continued calmly, "you will have what was once required of me." He crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt before her chair, taking her hands without hesitation. "Don't," he said hoarsely, "don't make this about that." "Then tell me what it is about," she replied. He looked up at her, eyes unguarded in a way she had never seen before. "It's about us," he said. "About a future I want with you. About a child I want, because it's ours. Not because of a title, not because of duty." Her throat tightened. "How do I know that?" she whispered. "Because I love you," he said. The words landed without force, without ceremony, without strategy. Josephine closed her eyes as tears gathered despite her effort to contain them. "I didn't expect that," she admitted. "Neither did I," he said. "But it's true." She rested her forehead against his. "I'm afraid," she confessed, "not of the child, of what happens if fear ever makes you doubt me again." He pressed her hands to his chest. "Then this is my promise," he said. "The next time fear rises, I choose you first. I will believe you before I protect myself. Always." She searched his face. This time she found no hesitation. Weeks passed. The pregnancy was not easy, but it was steady. He was attentive without suffocating, protective without controlling. He learned, awkwardly, earnestly, how to support without commandeering. Josephine continued her work as long as she was able. The education project expanded beyond expectation. New patrons, new locations, women writing to her from towns she had never visited, thanking her for creating something that had not existed before. One afternoon, she stood watching him speak with a group of students. His posture relaxed, his voice patient. She realized then that the man who had once treated marriage as containment had learned how to stand inside something living. And that mattered. That night, as they sat together in quiet, she rested a hand over her stomach. "This child," she said softly, "will never be a condition." He covered her hand with his. "No," he said. "This child will be a beginning." Josephine leaned into him, finally allowing herself to believe that what they were building was not fragile. It was deliberate, and for the first time since the night she was told to disappear, she felt no need to guard her presence at all. Give me an heir and disappear. The world did not pause because Josephine was with child. Society never did. But it adjusted. Invitations softened in tone. Conversations lowered when she entered rooms. Concern, both genuine and strategic, followed her presence now. A duchess carried weight. A duchess expecting an heir carried consequence. Josephine felt the shift immediately. People listened more carefully, not to her condition, but to her voice. She reduced her public engagements gradually, not because she was asked to, but because she chose to. The education project no longer required her constant presence. It had taken on a life of its own, guided by women she trusted, supported by systems she had built deliberately. That was her quiet triumph. One afternoon, while reviewing correspondence in the library, she noticed the Duke standing near the window, watching the grounds below. He looked different these days, less rigid, less guarded, still controlled, but no longer armored. "You're thinking too loudly," she said gently. He turned, surprised, then smiled faintly. "Is that what I'm doing?" "Yes," she replied. "You always do when you're worried." He accepted the observation without defensiveness. "I'm worried about you," he admitted, "about doing this wrong." She closed her ledger. "Then listen," she said, "not to fear, to me." He moved closer, sitting across from her. Josephine spoke calmly. She told him what she needed, what she did not, what frightened her, what steadied her. She did not soften the truth to protect him. She did not dramatize it to command attention. She trusted him with clarity, and he received it without retreat. That was new. The first sign of trouble came days later, not with raised voices or scandal sheets, with a letter. It arrived unsealed, anonymous, careless by design. Josephine recognized the handwriting instantly. Lady Margot Sinclair had not disappeared. She had merely been quiet. The letter was short, cruel in its restraint. It did not accuse. It suggested, it hinted at fragility, at uncertainty, at whispers circulating beyond London now, reaching families who cared deeply about succession. It ended with a single line. "One wonders whether the Duchess is capable of carrying a healthy heir." Josephine folded the letter once. Then again. Her hands were steady. When the Duke returned that evening, she gave it to him without comment. He read it once, then twice, then tore it in half. "I will end this," he said flatly. Josephine touched his arm. "No," she said. "You will listen first." He froze. She met his eyes. "This is not about silencing her," she continued. "This is about choosing me." He nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "Belief," she said. "Not defense, not fury, just belief." He did not hesitate. "I believe you," he said immediately, "and I will not allow anyone to question your body, your worth, or our child." The difference this time was immediate. No investigation, no pause, no distance. Action followed belief, not the other way around. The Duke addressed the matter publicly within days. He did not name Margot. He did not escalate. He stated simply, firmly, that any commentary regarding the Duchess's health, fertility, or character would be treated as an attack on the ducal house itself. The message was unmistakable. Josephine watched from the edge of the room as people absorbed it. Some nodded, some stiffened, some recalibrated alliances silently. No one questioned it. That night, she stood at the window of her chamber, looking out over the grounds. He joined her without speaking. "I didn't disappear," she said quietly. "No," he replied. "You never did." She turned to him then. "I need you to understand something," she said. "If fear ever makes you doubt me again, even silently, I will leave." He did not flinch. "I know," he said, "and I accept that." She searched his face. This time there was no fear beneath the resolve, only choice. Josephine leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not shaped by reaction, but by intention. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing, seen, chosen, and never again asked to disappear. Give me an heir and disappear. Fontes, Chapter 8, Narration en Anglais. Chapter 8. Winter arrived early that year, not with drama, but with persistence. Frost gathering along the edges of mornings, breath turning visible in the corridors before the fires were fully stoked. Josephine welcomed it. Cold clarified things. It slowed the pace of the world enough for truth to surface. Her body changed steadily now, unmistakably. What had once been a private knowledge had become visible reality. Society adjusted again, this time with certainty rather than speculation. There would be an heir. But Josephine was careful not to let that single fact eclipse everything else she had built. She continued to attend select engagements, continued to host when she chose, continued to sign letters and approve funding and receive reports from the schools that now operated independently of her daily presence. She did not vanish into maternity, and the Duke made no attempt to hide her away. He walked with her openly through the estate grounds, his pace matched to hers. He deferred to her judgment in public matters without announcement. He asked before arranging anything that involved her time or body. That, more than tenderness, convinced her he had learned. One afternoon, a physician arrived unannounced. Not at Josephine's request, not at her husband's insistence, but at the urging of the Duke's advisers. Josephine received the information without alarm. When the Duke returned that evening, she was waiting for him. "They sent for a doctor," she said evenly. He stiffened. "I know." "Why?" "They're concerned," he replied carefully, "about risk." Josephine studied him. "And you?" she asked. His answer came without delay. "I'm concerned about you." The distinction mattered. Still, she did not yield easily. "I will hear medical counsel," she said, "not political anxiety." He nodded, agreed. The physician's assessment was calm, professional, and precise. There were risks. Manageable ones, but risks nonetheless. Reduced exertion, careful travel. Rest without isolation. Josephine listened without protest, but when the advisor later suggested she withdraw entirely from public view, she spoke before the Duke could. "No," she said. The room went still. "My health will be managed," she continued. "My presence will not be erased." The advisor turned to the Duke. He did not hesitate. "My wife has spoken," he said. "That is the decision." Josephine felt something inside her steady. Later, alone together, she addressed what neither of them could ignore. "If it comes to a choice," she said quietly, "between position and person, between title and life, you must choose." He took her hands gently. "There is no choice," he said. "I choose you." She held his gaze. "This is not reassurance," she said. "It is a boundary." "I know," he replied. "And I accept it." That night, Josephine dreamed of doors opening without resistance, of rooms where she did not have to announce herself, of a future not shaped by contingency. Weeks passed. The risks increased slightly, then stabilized. Josephine rested more, worked less, delegated without guilt. The Duke adjusted his schedule around her without making it her responsibility. When anxiety crept into his voice, he checked it. When fear rose, he spoke it aloud instead of letting it calcify into doubt. That transparency was new and precious. One evening, as snow fell quietly outside her window, Josephine said something she had not planned to say. "I am not afraid anymore." He looked at her. "Of the birth?" "No," she replied. "Of being reduced." He nodded slowly. "I almost did that to you," he said. "Yes," she answered. "You did." He accepted it without defense. "And you survived it," he added. She smiled faintly. "No," she said, "I refused it." That difference mattered too. As winter deepened, Josephine understood something essential. The heir growing within her was no longer the center of the story. The marriage was not because it had become perfect, but because it had become chosen. And whatever spring would bring, pain, joy, risk, transformation, she would meet it not as a condition fulfilled, but as a woman who had remained fully present. "Give me an heir and disappear." The night the pain began, it arrived without ceremony, no warning, no dramatic prelude. Josephine had been reading by the fire when a sharp pressure settled low in her body, unfamiliar and unmistakable. She closed the book slowly, resting her palm against her abdomen, breathing through the first wave in silence. The Duke noticed immediately. "You're pale," he said, already rising. "I know," she replied calmly. "Send for the midwife." There was no panic in her voice. That steadied him more than any reassurance could have. The house shifted into motion at once. Lamps lit. Footsteps echoed. Orders carried down corridors with quiet urgency. Josephine was moved to her chambers, wrapped in warmth, supported on either side, but she remained fully present, fully herself. Pain sharpened, then eased, then returned stronger. The midwife arrived, efficient and direct. "It's early," she said after examination, "but not unexpected. We proceed carefully." The word carefully mattered. Josephine met the Duke's eyes across the room. "This is the moment," she said. He understood immediately. Not the birth. The choice. Advisors gathered in the adjoining room within the hour. Their voices were hushed, controlled, but the implications were clear. If complications worsened, intervention would be required. Decisions would be made. Decisions that, for generations, had favored legacy over life. The Duke stood apart from them, listening without responding. When they finished, he spoke once. "My wife will be protected," he said, "at all costs." One advisor hesitated. "Your Grace, the succession exists because she does," he replied flatly. "Without her, there is nothing to preserve." There was no argument after that. He returned to her bedside, kneeling as he had once done months earlier, not in fear, not in guilt, but in devotion. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not leaving." She gripped his hand when the next wave came, breath steady despite the pain. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not afraid." Hours stretched. The room grew quiet between contractions, filled only with candlelight and measured breathing. Josephine focused inward, grounding herself not in duty, but in choice. She was not enduring this for a title. She was doing it because she wanted the life that followed. When exhaustion crept in, the Duke supported her physically, emotionally, without command or correction. He did not instruct. He did not retreat. He stayed. At one point, when the pain peaked sharply, fear flickered across his face. Josephine saw it. She tightened her grip. "Look at me," she said firmly. He did. "Do not doubt," she continued. "Not now, not ever." "I won't," he said. "I swear." And for the first time she believed it without reservation. The birth was long, harder than expected, but steady. When the child finally cried out, strong, alive, undeniable, the sound cut through the room like light. Josephine wept once. Not from pain, from relief. The midwife placed the child against her chest, warm and real and impossibly small. "A son," she said, "healthy." The Duke's breath left him in a single, broken exhale. He laughed once, quietly, disbelieving. Then he cried. Josephine watched him hold their child with reverence rather than triumph. This was not possession. It was awe. Later, when the room had emptied and the world had narrowed again to the three of them, he leaned close and whispered against her temple. "I never wanted an heir," he said softly. "I wanted a family. I just didn't know the difference." Josephine closed her eyes. Outside, dawn broke pale and quiet over Northmere. Inside, something ended, and something better had begun. "Give me an heir and disappear." Spring returned to Northmere without asking permission. Light moved differently through the corridors now. Windows were opened more often. Laughter, rare once, appeared without announcement and lingered where it pleased. Josephine noticed everything, not because motherhood had sharpened her awareness, but because peace had made space for it. The child slept in the cradle beside her chair, small chest rising and falling with steady certainty. She did not hover. She did not disappear into vigilance. She trusted the rhythm of life she had chosen. The Duke entered quietly, as he always did now. He paused before approaching, as if reminding himself that presence was a privilege, not a right. Josephine looked up and smiled, not out of politeness, Out of recognition, he crossed the room and sat beside her, resting one hand on the cradle, the other on her knee. There was no ceremony in the gesture, no weight of expectation, only belonging. "You should be resting," he said softly. "I am," she replied. "This is rest." He watched her for a long moment. "You changed this house," he said finally. She tilted her head. "No, I refuse to vanish inside it." He nodded. That was the difference. The months that followed were not perfect. They were honest. Some days fear returned, quietly, without drama. But now it was named, spoken, disarmed before it could harden into doubt. Josephine did not forgive everything at once. She did not need to. Trust returned the way it should, gradually, through repetition, through choice, through moments where he believed her without evidence, defended her without applause, stood beside her without condition, and she allowed herself to lean in without shrinking. The world noticed, not because they announced it, but because power shifted. Josephine became known not only as a duchess, not only as a patron, not only as a mother, but as a woman who had redefined what presence meant inside a marriage built on obligation. The phrase that had once defined her fate lost its grip entirely. She had been asked to disappear. Instead, she remained. Years later, when she would be asked how it happened, how a union born of control became something living, she would never offer a dramatic answer. She would say only this, that love did not arrive when she was chosen. It arrived when she chose herself, and when the man beside her learned to choose her too. Not once, not in desperation, but daily, without fear. Josephine leaned back now, watching her child sleep, watching her husband move through the room with quiet care. This was not obligation fulfilled. This was family formed, and nothing, not title, not power, not legacy, would ever come before that again. Final reflection. Some stories are not about being loved. They are about being seen, about the courage it takes to remain present in spaces that expect silence, about choosing yourself even when the world offers comfort in exchange for disappearance. This is not a story about perfection. It is a story about boundaries, about trust earned slowly, about love that grows only after fear loses its authority, and about the quiet power of refusing to vanish. If this story stayed with you, if you felt seen somewhere within it, I invite you to stay, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Your presence here matters more than you know. And remember, the right love never asks you to disappear.